Odds have come out on DraftKings, and I was so curious. As soon as Dana White announced for January pay-per-view, Sean Strickland versus Dricus Du Plessis, I was so curious who was going to be a favorite. I mean, that's an interesting match, and it's also one that I haven't looked to. I've never considered that fight because soon as Sean won the belt, I assumed, like all of you, he would have to rematch Adesanya. When Adesanya made it known that, no, he's in fact going to take a little break from fighting anybody. That was a surprise to us all, but the timing was fine. You had Kamaru Usman, who has a win over Sean Strickland, taking on Chimaev, who's undefeated. You make it a number one contenders match. That makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense for that to be a number one contenders match, particularly when you have the backstory of Kamaru Usman and Sean Strickland having a past together. Okay, great. So it goes down and everything seems to be moving in that direction. Sean starts doing interviews, talking about Chimaev. Sean's coach, Eric Nixick, who ran the room when Chimaev came in for roughly 3 months and trained there every single day. And he was coming out and talking about, no, these guys, when I saw them in sparring, very competitive. And you have Chimaev operating on and conducting his interviews with the full knowledge that he will be fighting Sean next. The point is, I never did an X's and O's on Du Plessis. And as soon as Dana said it, I can acknowledge that's a really interesting match, but it's one that I haven't considered. And I'm going to be rolling with Sean Strickland either way. But I will acknowledge the X's and O's of that match are different. It's very difficult to imagine Sean Strickland at this point can't go toe-to-toe with anyone in the world, considering that's what he did and that's how he defeated Adesanya. It's very tough at this point. Du Plessis has some very sneaky striking capabilities himself. And Du Plessis has demonstrated the other element, which is an ability to grapple. Now, that's one that Sean most certainly has. I'm just saying, as you think of it and you just go back to their last fight, there was more shown, but I don't know that I could say it was more of a surprise for Du Plessis. I mean, he was a 3-1 dog. We did not think he was going to beat Whitaker. It's a former champion, a future Hall of Famer, an elevation on a card for a guy that in his previous fight was complaining on Twitter because he was undercard. It's just too much. This is just too big of a bite for this small fish to take. That's what everybody believed. And it was a dominant victory that showed guts. It showed heart. There was pain involved, right? Somewhere Du Plessis was hurt. It pushed right through it. You'd have never known. But if you were to juxtapose, again, just their last fights, that battle was not as uphill perception-wise as what Sean did. Not to mention Sean had to go into enemy territory. Not to mention it was relatively short notice. Not to mention he was a massive underdog, not just 3-1. Not to mention he was also very dominant. Many viewers that saw it thought it was 5-round Sean, none for Adesanya. I can't cite the official scorecard off the top of my head. So I'm just saying, if that's what we're doing, if we're just going back to last fight, which is largely what we do, it's largely what the odds makers do, right? They don't look at something, oh, this guy was a 4-time world champion in 2009. It doesn't work that way. It's what have you done just recently? Let me base that. Let me make my projection. And the projection came back favorite Du Plessis. And if Du Plessis is going to beat him, now here's where you're going to have fun, right? Doesn't matter who the favorite is. There's only two guys. One of them's going to be the favorite, right? What's interesting is once you get to your opinion that Du Plessis is going to win, and it's very tight odds, by the way. Over at DraftKings, it's very tight odds. I would generally speak colloquially and call it even money. It's not. It's a negative 125 to a plus 140, or plus 125 to a negative 140, I mean. But that's pretty damn close. But once you get there, you then have the fun part, which is to tell your viewer how. So can Du Plessis beat Sean Strickland? Sure he can. If you're willing to bet that he's going to, you're going to have to convince yourself how. What is your answer to that? What is the path to victory? Du Plessis is great on his feet, for sure, but he's not Adesanya, which by virtue would mean he's not Sean Strickland. But Du Plessis will take a fight to the ground more willingly. He'll put more effort into those takedowns than Sean Strickland will ever consider doing. But Sean Strickland is a pain in the ass to take down, and he's even harder to keep there. So though that's not where your mind would go, because that's not what you've seen as of late, and one of the reasons you haven't seen Sean in that position, both with his fight against the Russian, his fight with Cannonier, his fight with Izzy, is because those guys, one thing in common, they couldn't get him down. It's very interesting. And for Du Plessis, you are going to have to wonder, right? There was a pressure that beat him. There was a pressure that stopped him from performing against Adesanya and taking that match. It got too big, too fast. And whether it was the location, the turnaround, whatever it was, there was something. And one thing that match would have shown us would be to answer the question. You have a constant undercard guy. Now, obviously, that was the wrong spot to have him, obviously. But you don't know anything until you know. You have an undercard guy. And the reason that's so relevant is the main event is a different pressure. But aside from being a different pressure, which some people handle just fine, he sure as hell did with Whitaker, which was only one step down. Aside from that, you now have 5 rounds. And in the Whitaker fight, there was a few things that happened. But Du Plessis having great exertion and also reaching exhaustion is one of the things that happened. Now, many guys will get to exhaustion and be able to push and operate in that zone. Those guys are champions. Not some of the time, every time. Every time, every sport. If you find that guy who can reach the point of exhaustion, which will make a coward out of any man, he can reach that point and he can maintain. You now have a champion. And we simply haven't seen Du Plessis in that spot. We have seen Sean Strickland tested in 5-round fights for years. Sean Strickland, before he was the champion of the world, was a constant main eventer. In fact, the only time in any kind of recent, roughly 2.5, roughly 3 years, the only time that he wasn't a main event, he was a co-main event on an Adesanya card. Oh, and by the way, he took on what turned out to be the best guy in the world, Alex Pereira, who won the belt in his very next contest. So there is a lot of moving parts, and generally those would all be factored in. Generally, everything that I just spoke to you about would be factored in. But whoever factored it in spit out an answer out the back. That regardless of the pressure being too much, regardless of fear of a certain guy, and this guy beat that guy. So if you feared Adesanya, you must really fear Sean, whether that's true or not. It would be considered. And once all those things were considered, none of which sound great for Du Plessis in theory, but that's what a line is. A line is in theory. They still decided that Du Plessis was going to leave the world champion. I just think that's a very interesting breakdown. And if that were to happen, Du Plessis getting to this spot is one of the most meteoric rises that you'll ever find. You can go back over the history of the UFC. You are not going to find somebody from an undercard 1 year later main eventing a pay-per-view for the world championship. You're not going to find that. And if Du Plessis would have followed the script and have done this back in August, just for example, now you've got a guy that within 8 months is an undercard guy. Within 8 months becomes the number 1 contender the hard way. Nobody goes through Robert Whitaker. He did it the hard way. That was a very meaningful win. And then he could have fought for the championship. I'm just sharing, this is really a fascinating story. If you want rise, if you want your dreams to come true, if you think you're being held back, there's a few guys to study right in front of you right now. Possibly none doing a better job than Sean O'Malley. But next on that list is possibly Dricus Du Plessis, a favorite? Supposed to beat Sean Strickland? I don't quite see it that way. But a job well done and an opportunity that's been a long time coming? Yeah, definitely. At this point, just getting the fight, Du Plessis is winning.